So here everything is, all good and primed. I ended up not having a primer conflict between using the Rust-Oleum and the Valspar, and actually it went on very smooth. It looked as if I was getting a little bit of a tooth to the priming, but I got lucky. It must have just been an effect of the lighting outside. You can see they are very smooth looking. Bases. Now I've gotten the question on assembling after painting how well these things are going to join together, and well, let me just go ahead and get one of these. What I'm probably going to do is file any of the paint or primer that gets on these nubs, these joiners, before assembling. That way you won't have to worry too much about the fit. So it shouldn't be too tight, and it should stick okay. Yep, good and primed, ready for paint. So let's just say you finished priming, and for whatever reason your model became gritty, most likely from priming in too humid of conditions. Do not prime when it's humid. Well, as you can see here, my black Kraken looks really smooth and beautiful. And my scabrous, for some reason, looks a bit scabby. Not really sure why. But it happens. It's nothing I can't handle. I'm just going to take a light sandpaper to its face. That seems to be the only area that's a problem. But let's say you have a serious problem on your hands because your primer malfunctioned. So what do? Well, the only solution I've found for removing primer is automotive brake fluid. That's right, brake fluid. Now, personally, I'd only use it as a last resort because I hate working with chemicals, especially with strong smells. Simple Green just doesn't cut it. Now, Simple Green is usually used for removing paint. I've got tons of it. When you've worked with models as long as I have, you tend to buy in bulk. I love Simple Green because it removes all paint really easily. Just soak it overnight, use a toothbrush, and boom, it's off. But it just does not work at all with primer. Primer requires something stronger, and unanimously I think most modelers are saying brake fluid is the best. Remember these babies? These are just the 3 sprues that we primed earlier with the 3 different primer colors. I wanted to show you something here. Now this is Sunburst Yellow. Now if we paint that, whew, and a bunch we have. Here. Didn't mean to get quite that much paint. But it works. Just slop it around here. You can see how nice and bright that is. And if we apply that likewise to the gray. And the gray primed almost as light as the white for some reason. I'm used to it being slightly darker. I'm actually used to it being just looking like the actual naked plastic. Oh well. And here on black. Just going to show you what I mean here when I say light colors paint best when you're using white primer as compared to black primer. So here you can roughly see all 3 shades of primer and yellow on each one. The worst coverage is of course on black, and the best on white. With white primer you'd probably only have to layer twice to get a nice solid sunburst yellow color. White makes light colors nice and bright faster. Now to achieve that sunburst yellow color you'd have to be working up your layers and not starting with just sunburst yellow. You'd have to go lighter. So, you know, with a brown color first or even an orange, and then successively lightening it up, and then finally a last coat of sunburst yellow. You can see a lot of the paint strokes in here as well. And with the gray primer it's a little bit better, but still not as good as white. So if you want to do the shade wraith with a light primer, gray or white primer, that is certainly a good option. I went with black only because, like I said, I'm lazy and I don't mind adding the layers. Plus I also like a darker finish usually for my wargaming miniatures, and black always allows for a slightly grittier, darker finish in general, and not nearly so bright and white. Now optionally you could spray paint or prime your bases white, and your water will really pop, especially against the dingier color of the ships. So just going over some options here. Now for this project you certainly don't require a foundation paint, but I will give you an example of why foundation paints are awesome. Now here's red gore, brushed right on to black primed plastic. I don't want to get the brush too watery here, otherwise it'll ruin the experiment. And here we are with Mercrite red foundation. Now right off you can see the results. In order to get a nice solid coat like we did with this foundation paint, we will have to do several layers of red gore. Instead, if you use a foundation paint, it applies pretty thickly, so you only have to apply 1 or 2 coats to get a nice solid bright color, and that's against black primer. This is one reason why black primer can be difficult to work with when it comes to lighter colors like your yellows and your reds and your lighter greens and whites, things like that. So I'm really thankful that Citadel put out the foundation line. It really saves a lot of time, and the results are quite clear. So it might behoove you to pick up some foundation paints, but again, you know, if you're on a budget, you can certainly just go ahead and get just regular paints and just do a couple more layers to achieve, you know, a nice solid laydown. So it's not completely required, but again, just an option for you. Also, Vallejo and Reaper have their own foundation line, although they don't call it foundation. I can't think of their names off the top of my head, but check in the description of this video and I'll try to write the name down in case you're using their lines, because a lot of different paint lines are coming out with their own formulations of a thick base coat paint. Alright, so here we are again with the red. On the right is a red gore built up in several layers to get a nice solid coat. And again, this is just one layer of a foundation paint. So we're ready to get started with painting. Alright, so get out all of the pieces of terrain that deal with rocks, rocky cliff faces. This will be the easiest thing to start with, and also let me show you some really cool techniques. Now I'm going to be going for a very cold gray scheme. By cold gray I mean gray tones that are more on the light bluish whitish tone compared to, say, a warm gray, which would be a gray with a brownish tone to it. I just feel that the graveyard should be more of a cool gray color than a warm gray one, but you certainly can make the choice. Here are the colors I'm predominantly going to be starting with. I'm going to go ahead and start with the foundation of Sheridan Granite, follow up with Codex Gray, and then of course going progressively lighter to Fortress Gray, with final edge highlighting with Space Wolves Gray. Now the Citadel does have a couple other grays. Here's Foundation Adeptus Battle Gray and Shadow Gray. Now I find Shadow Gray to be just way too blue. I'll show you the difference here. It's just a little bit more blue than I would like. I want to stay with the more weathered, bony kind of gray. And the Adeptus Battle Gray is way too black. It's almost just like using black. Don't want that. So darker to lighter with a few good tones here. And we're going to focus only on the rocks. So that includes even these little shipwreck pieces, because there are rocky details around here. Might as well hit them all while you can, and it'll save on time. Same as when we will work on the water. We'll hit all of the water at the same time. And there's like rocks and water on all of the terrain pieces. Optionally, if you're interested in adding kind of a mossy effect, which we'll go into a little bit more once we're actually done layering with the colors, I'm going to go with Foundation Narlock Green. Of course, any green will do here, really. It's really personal preference. And a nice wash of Thraka Green, which hopefully it will give me the effect I'm looking for. But we'll see when we get there, when we use it. Now, in the rule book, I don't know if you have given a real close going over of what the terrain looks like, but they have this really cool effect, and also very realistic effect. Down towards the base, along in this area of all of the pieces of terrain, they have a nice dark look, as if, you know, when the water rises and lowers, and it leaves that mossy, wet, nasty edge with algae and such. We're going to try to mimic that with our paint job. So that's also where the greens are going to come in. I think it looks really, really awesome in the book, and I'm sure we can mimic that pretty easily. Also, washes will be good to get on up in these little crevices with some green, just to add to that mossy river effect. The nastier the better. I mean, this is a graveyard we're talking about. It's supposed to be spooky. Some of these terrain pieces have really cool skulls with these eyes that in the books are painted like they're glowing with this ethereal, just nasty green or bluish radiance. We're not going to be doing the eyes quite yet, but when we get there I'll talk about how to achieve that glowing look, which we'll also be using for the volcano terrain piece. Now I'm personally going to go with red glowing eyes. I know it's a stereotype. The green glowing eyes look awesome, but I'm just going to go with red for myself. You certainly don't have to stick with my color schemes at all. But I am going to just go over what colors I'm using as I go along. And if you want to use those, great. And if you want to be more creative and go at your own palette, that's just fine too. While I'm on the subject of colors, I just wanted to say I'm going to add a link in this video to, I don't know what you call it, a conversion chart of sorts between different paint lines. So say, I say use Citadel, Red Gore, I'm using Red Gore. You can look at this conversion chart and you can say, okay, well, Reaper has a color that's like Red Gore and it's called this. Or Vallejo has a color that's like Red Gore and it's called this. So if you're using any of those paint lines, you'll be able to get a color that relatively matches what I'm working with. But again, just use what colors you like. You don't have to stick to any one scheme. It's creative. Just do what you want. There's no rules here. Just make it look good. I've forgotten perhaps the most important thing before you begin painting. Make sure you have yourself a tasty grog. And whatever you do, do not drink your paint water and don't get paint in your rum. YARRR! So the first step we're going to do here is choose what piece you want to start with and get out your first base layer color, which should be your darkest color. In my case, it's Foundation Sheridan Granite. And this step is relatively easy. Just grab the paint, slap it on. You don't even need a good brush. Try to use a bigger brush than what I'm using. This is a little bit small. Just getting all the cracks and crevices. Can't even really see a difference between the black primer and the granite. Probably going to switch over to a bigger brush. This is going a little too slow for me. That's more like it. And when you get up here into the skull area, go ahead and cover all of the skulls. You can even go ahead and cover the stairways if you like. We're just going to be lightening them up later along with the skulls anyway. If you have an airbrush, now would be a good time to use it. Airbrushes are great when it comes to base colors or applying your base paint. Otherwise, you're just gonna be sitting here for a couple hours just slopping the paint on, like me. I don't personally like airbrushes. Most professionals will have an airbrush just for this purpose. My personal disdain for airbrushes stem from, well, certain events long ago. Don't particularly like them. So you see, I'm not using a very good brush. I'm using a pretty craptacular brush. Save all your brushes. Crappy brushes always come in hand. So here we are, all based. Can't tell too much of a difference, but I did the turtle as well. Maybe you can see a difference because the turtle and the water parts are not based yet. Maybe you can see it, maybe not. You'll be able to see the next color we work on though. A lot of folks, when they do miniature painting, they like to get a piece of blue tack and stick the model on it on top of like one of these pots, but it doesn't work so well with the terrain. You might be able to do that with the ships. Personally, I don't mess with blue tack in any way, shape, or form really. I find it has like an oil to it, and I don't like, you know, that I touch it and then touch the model and get oil. But I'm finicky that way, and I just don't feel like going out and buying blue tack. And if I get some paint on my fingers while I'm holding the piece, I don't care. But one of the good things about the GW paint and the Citadel paint is that it dries really quickly. Now that's both a good thing and a bad thing. If you find that your paint just dries way too fast, at least way too fast for you, what you can do is you can get something called flow improver, or it's also known as retarder, and mix it in with your paint, and it'll help the paint stay wet longer. It'll keep longer. So say Citadel has a working time of, oh, I don't know, if you put it in a palette, maybe 20 minutes tops. I don't know for sure, but if you put it in a palette, let's just say it gives you 20 minutes working time. If you put a flow improver into it, you might have, you know, an hour or even longer of working time. So retarders, flow improvers, they work for thinning the paint, but also extending the working life. So that might be an option for you. Again, slop the paint on and spread it out as much as possible. Just going for coverage. Oh, another thing, which a little delayed action here, but on GW website they were showing using blue tack for covering the pegs on the ships that we're painting before assembly, which is probably a good idea. I'm just going to file down the pegs after I'm done painting. I'll probably achieve the same effect. So if you have blue tack, feel free to use it, and if you don't worry about it. But again, my arch nemesis is laziness. And I didn't used to be such a lazy painter, but it sort of just happened when I switched from being a professional to just doing it as a hobby. So I do take shortcuts to get things done. I don't necessarily go all out anymore like I used to. But, I mean, my work stands for itself. I think it looks pretty good, you know, for tabletop gameplay. And I think, not being too full of myself, that it looks better than most tabletop models. But then I do like doing the finer details. I don't work only with like dipping methods or washes, and we'll talk about dipping a little bit later. I'm personally against most forms of dipping, but that's because it's not often well done. I don't really want to get into it right now. So you can have the TV going or music and doing this at the same time. It's pretty great. You finish before you know it. I guess while I'm on the subject of dipping, I can talk about it. Basically, dipping is where people tend to use like a polyurethane varnish or floor wax or something, and they take their model and they just dunk it in there, and like a wash, the color of the varnish goes into all the cracks and crevices. Except it's like a very thick varnish. If it's done improperly, it'll pool weirdly, it'll obscure detail, and then it tends to have this really bright, glassy look to it, which serves as like a finishing coat, but only if you're a big fan of heavy gloss. Now, I've seen some dipping look decent. As a Tyranid player, of course, I'm very familiar with folks who dip their Tyranids, and there are some very well done armies where they brush on the dip after applying base coats and such, and it just really looks like a wash was applied. But my thought is, if you're going to do it the correct way and make it look like a wash, then why not just use a wash? It does the same thing, essentially, sitting in the crevices and making the detail pop. I don't know, that's just me. I think most dipping is done out of laziness. And I find a lot of the airbrushers tend to do that too. Like, no offense with people who use a lot of airbrush, but personally, to me, I think the airbrush is best suited for base layers, base coats, and supplementing with airbrush only, not making it your prime method of paint. You just can't get the same detail as you can with a brush. You get a very different look, you get smooth transitions, which, you know, look beautiful, but please do supplement with, I mean, don't just supplement with the brush, primarily use your brush, supplement with airbrush. But that's my own personal opinion. No hard feelings. And again, boring the pug. I don't want to go too fast on these videos by any means. I can't say like how often I'll post a video. I am going to try to post one painting video a week at least. But if I'm going too fast for you, you know, you don't have to race to catch up to me or anything. Go at your own pace, definitely. It'll be much more rewarding for you. And the outcome of your models will look way better going at your own pace. And I apologize if I'm going too slow for some. But I do have my own family too, and sometimes I just can't shoot video when I'd like to, or have the ambition to sit down and paint always. So certain things take precedence. So all I can say is I'll post video when I can post video. And I'll try to keep in mind that other people have lives too, and not to go too dang fast. And there is a hair stuck in my paint here. Happens when you're using old crappy brushes. I suppose it doesn't matter. Gotcha. And once we're done with this base coat, then things start getting fun. The base coat is always the most boring layer. Now for this castle part, feel free to go ahead and work some of the paint up in here. It don't matter. In fact, I might even go ahead and paint this whole castle while I'm at it. another layer of paint won't hurt anything. In fact, the more layers the better. I know I always say about saving having to do layers, but you know, technically the more the merrier. Also, I do have the White Dwarf magazine. I have been looking at it to check out the paint schemes and whatnots. We're trying to follow the White Dwarf a little bit, the GW color scheme a little bit. Oh, pug hair. But I find that it can be a little fiddly. I don't like mixing paints a whole heck of a lot, and there's sometimes easier ways to achieve a similar look. So by all means, if you have that White Dwarf magazine, give it a look-see, but don't feel like you absolutely have to use their methods either to get something to look decent. You know, there's a reason that their models look so great, and that's mainly because they do it every day. That is their job. And they certainly have more time, possibly, to work in than the average Joe with a family. At least they're going to work to paint, whereas I am painting at home. And when you paint at home, sometimes you've got home issues to deal with, home life. I can tell you I'd get a whole heck of a lot more stuff done if I was painting in a studio somewhere than at home, because I do get distracted. But again, distractions can be good. You don't want to keep too focused too long on miniatures, for sure, because your eyes will start to bug out and pop out of your head, and you don't want that. Makes it very hard to aim the cannons. So I think I've covered everything here for the base layer for your terrain. I still need to do the rocks and stuff around these shipwrecks. But the next layer of paint will show some dry brushing techniques, and we'll be using the next lighter color gray that you've got. I will be using Codex gray, and you will be using either Codex gray if you've got Citadel or whatever lighter gray color you've got. You can always mix white along with your base color to lighten up your gray and follow along, or just go ahead and check out the description if you've got Reaper or Vallejo and see what colors match best with what I'm using. And again, just use what looks good. I'll see you for the next work in progress video. And you'd better come back, or else. Or else. Or else what? You seem as if I have caught you doing something bad, Muggsy. Oh, that's my pug. Oh, yeah, you love it. You love it. You love it. I highly encourage you to go out and get yourself a first mate. Bonus cookies if it's a pug. Yes. Yes. They are the greatest. Everyone should have a dog. Who needs a parrot when you've got this? Nobody needs a parrot. No. The feathers make me sneeze. Ah.